If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's a local urban legend in your area? Satanism, cults, haunted small towns, missing kids, etc. I live in the city of Yonkers outside of NYC. The son of Sam was a resident here and supposedly was caught up in a local devil-worshipping cult that operated out of a park nearby. It is said that the son of Sam took the fall for cult who were all involved in the murders. Supposedly there were politicians and police officers also in the cult, so that they needed a cover-up. It makes for an interesting story if nothing else. A couple towns over from me there is the Little People's Village. It's a spot in the woods with a bunch of miniature houses made out of stone. The story is there was a guy who went crazy, then killed his family, and made all these houses for the voices in his head. There is also a throne, and it is said that if you sit in the throne, you will die within 7 years. People mostly go up there to drink, do drugs, and have sex. The Albinos of Hicks Road, San Jose, California. There is an albino community that lives there. The sun hurts their skin, so they only come out at night. When you drive down the road, your car lights also hurt their skin, so they hide behind trees. The albinos will chase your car. There is often a white van parked along the road, and the driver will try to get you to help him fix his car, only to kidnap you, rape you, kill you, etc. I mean, none of that stuff is even remotely true, but it's been an urban legend for several decades now. In the village that I grew up in the 1990s, there was this odd guy who always used to cycle around. As I remember, he was in his 30s and would wear slightly dirty jeans, and a leather waistcoat over a dirty t-shirt. He looked a bit like a troublemaker, but no one ever saw him walking, much less speaking to anyone or making trouble. He was just always cycling around. By both adults and children he was known as Herbie Cat Killer, and the story went that he would steal pet cats and torture them to death. He also wore a necklace on which he strung cat teeth. This last bit was the piece of tangible evidence which made the story true, though I think it was more a Crocodile Dundee look he was going for, and the teeth probably weren't feline. Fast forward a few years and something terrible happened in the village that would reveal Herbie's true motive for cycling around all the time. A 16-year-old girl from my school was murdered. It was horrible, really, and during the early days of the investigation, Herbie disappeared. Naturally, people were suspicious, but then the guy who actually did it was found pretty quick and Herbie went back to his old habits. Anyway, it all came out after that, indiscreet police plus village rumor mill, that what Herbie was actually doing was cycling around and keeping track of when families went on holiday. He would then tell local gypsies, there were a lot of camps around our area, who would then break into garages and steal tools, motorcycles and other stuff, cutting him in on the profits. Probably the Triclops. He was some form of mutant man created in a lab during World War II. The Triclops stands well over 2 meters tall, has skin made of silver, is incredibly strong, nocturnal, and lives in the catacombs. He eats chickens and other small animals. Sometimes the remains of his meals can be seen near the various entrances to his underground domain. Sometimes if it is quiet enough you can even hear him underground. There is a historical farm near my hometown where it's rumored the owner committed murder. It's believed he was a well-respected man who acted as the local minister. He once told the congregation that he was better off preaching to rocks, so he put a bunch of stones in the pews and preached to them. On to the murder. He supposedly impregnated his daughter. He was so mad at this that after the birth he killed the baby and his daughter in the basement. A friend of mine swears she talked to a ghost of the girl when she was younger. Not really an urban legend, but here I go. We have kind of a big industry in my hometown based on winning/mining white sand. They say it's the purest in the world. Anyway, when they can't get any more sand, they just leave it behind, and that leaves a lot of lakes. People, well, adults, would always tell us about the quicksand people got stuck in/disappearing/dying. Now I'm older and I know there's no quicksand most of these lakes, and nobody really ever died. It was just a means to keep children from going swimming there. 'Cause yeah, they're dangerous. No supervision, very big, very deep and very cold. There's an old, 2-story, wooden house down the street from me that's painted a horrendous shade of Pepto-Bismol pink with green trim. Rumor has it that the woman who has owned the house for years mildly insulted a local bruja, who cursed her. The curse was that she had to paint the house the bruja's favorite shade of pink and keep it that way, or the male children of the family would all die young. Seriously though, I think people are just trying to figure out a way to explain why someone would paint a house that color. Found a pic of it on Google Street View. Satanists and human sacrifices on the mountain. Supposedly in the 70s a professor started a Satanist cult, and they would go up this mountain road and block it with their car, Then when you drove up and had to stop, they'd pull another car in behind you and trap you, then sacrifice you to Satan. There's a spot on the mountain called the King's Chair, and that's supposedly where the killing would happen. It's easy to hike to and sort of looks like an altar, I guess. There are also satanic symbols on the mountain, and no matter how many times their sand blasted off, they reappear. Also the Goatman of Prague Bridge. I have two in my area. The Glowing House. There is a house on State Line Road that divides Arkansas and Oklahoma. It sits on about 10 acres of land on a hill that is completely fenced off and posted. At night, you can clearly see the house has sort of a blue glow to it. There are absolutely no exterior or interior lights on. Also, the house is abandoned. Has been for as long as I can remember. Gravity Hill. There is a hill located nearby, don't recall the city off the top of my head, where a bus full of kids crashed and all were killed, allegedly. Legend has it that if you go to the top of the hill, put your car in neutral, that you will remain at the top of the hill without moving backwards. People say it is the spirits of the children pushing the car up the hill to keep you safe. I have heard some people say that they put baby powder on their back bumper and will see little handprints afterwards. There are houses here that have been around since the incorporation of the town. They are well over 100 years old, and they were all built in the same style. All of them are currently occupied by families and have been remodeled. There is one house though where the owners live in a separate house on the property and has been unable to be sold in the last 20 years or so because rumor has it that the place is haunted. Apparently anyone who has lived there in the past never stayed for more than a week or so before they had to leave. I pass by it almost every day and I wish I had the money to buy it and remodel the place. I hate to see a place with that much history going to waste. Built in 1886, the Ohio State Reformatory was designed to humanely rehabilitate first-time offenders, and was initially applauded as a positive step toward prison reform. However, conditions rapidly deteriorated. After 94 years of operation, the prison's legacy became one of abuse, torture, and murder. Denounced by civil rights activists for its brutalizing and inhumane conditions, the prison eventually shut down in 1990. Now, within the decaying walls of this still abandoned prison, the restless spirits of its prisoners and workers are said to still remain confined. I live in Worthington, Ohio. In our town we have the legend of the White Bride. Supposedly in the late 1800s a wedding was being held in our town square. Through a series of unfortunate events a horse and buggy ran wildly across the village green and into the wedding party. The bride was instantly killed. Now, the legend goes if you go to the village green on the anniversary of the tragedy you can hear the gallop of horse hooves and the scream of the bridge as she was run down. It's a big thing for the kids in our town to gather on the green on this night and see if they can hear it. The story I know was told by a direct descendant, Harry Leeds, R.I.P., so here goes. Mrs. Leeds was our typical housewife in the 1800s. Nothing too special about her. She did what every good wife did back then, and that was to have kids. Plenty of kids. Survival rates back then were not so good, so having as many kids as possible was the norm to survival of the family. So we get to the interesting part. Mrs. Leeds is doing her duty birthing what was to be her 13th child. Now 13 is considered an unlucky number today, but back then it was a cursed number and people took a lot of stock in that then. Well, anyways, here she is giving birth. It's a tough birth, and out eventually comes something so hideous and ugly it literally scared the shit out of everyone there. Even so much that the midwife and doctor who were present even wrote about it in their personal journals. Stepping back a second here, you have to remember the time period we are in. When a child is born with defects or some sort of retardation, they did the right and Christian thing and tossed it out in the woods and let God decide the fate. I think we all can figure out that God wasn't much help to these infants and they perished rather quickly. So back to good old Mrs. Leeds. She'd just given birth to what was described as some sort of beast monster with wing appendages and goat/horse-like feet. Some terrible deformities this kid had. Anyhow, Mrs. Leeds or Mr. Leeds did the Christian thing and tossed this thing into the woods. Let God decide. For several years there were strange reports of this thing roaming the woods. People were genuinely frightened. Urban legends abounded. Reports into the 1980s have been reported in the area. The Leeds' original home is still here. Kinda deep in the woods there is what remains of a foundation to the home. The location is kept a secret just so you don't have wackos doing sacrifices out there and whatnot. The town I live in has many streets and areas named after the Leeds family, and direct descendants still live in this town of Galloway, NJ. Could it be true? I have heard that people have been raised by wolves. Could this be the case? Even so, could anything like that live over 150 plus years? But it does make a nice tourist attraction of sorts. And hell, we got the state hockey team and the local Air Force squadron named after it. That's worth something, right? Indiana folk legend of the Blue Hole. Southern Indiana is prone to sinkholes due to limestone being weathered out from the previous ice age. This part is true, they are everywhere down here. The legend goes that there is a blue hole, a sinkhole filled with crystal blue water, the kind you find when a quarry floods. Legend goes that no one has ever reached the bottom because it separates into an elaborate underwater cave. Even after professional dives, some teens drowned in the blue hole and their bodies were never found. The blue hole just swallowed them up. This one is mild compared to other Indiana legends, but geographically the Blue Hole is closest to where I am. High school I went to was supposedly Gestapo interrogation center during the Nazi occupation of Czech Republic. School is in Prague. Rumors ran around schoolmates that many rooms, now classrooms, were used for very violent interrogations and/or executions, including schoolyard where kids now play sports. After graduation, or during senior year, can't remember exactly, I found out that the building actually was Gestapo station during war, but the part about executions is unclear, no records made or destroyed records, but given the nature of former tenants it is maybe more true than rumor. Another legend around this was, that Nazis started renovating the building and added new wings to it so it would look like swastika from aerial view, but never finished it before the end of war. Now that one seemed more unlikely, since you need to use a lot of imagination to see swastika from aerial view. It was certainly spooky during the 6 years I went there. There is an old 10th century castle, think military outpost, not fortified housing for the local noblemen. It is said to be cursed and turns anyone who lives there into an evil bandit. Turns out this comes from the fact that the noble family that had it built turned to a life of pillaging about 3 generations later, around 1050, and was therefore crushed by the Dukes of Burgundy, who didn't really like their noble families to mess with their territories. Afterwards it was used to protect the valley of the Saône below, and the real castle of the Dukes that is still standing about 10 kilometers away. During the 18th and 19th century the castle, now mostly a ruin, housed hermits, mostly religious shut-ins, the last of whom were chased away by the locals after things went missing in random farms. I live about 15 miles outside of Stull, Kansas. There's a cemetery there with a church, behind which there is purportedly a staircase that is one of the 7 gateways to hell. The church is old, so it's just stone walls and no roof, but allegedly no rain or snow will fall inside of the church, and if you manage to find the staircase, it descends forever and you can never reach the surface even if you turn around just moments after beginning your descent. There was a large tree near the church that was supposed to have been used to hang witches once upon a time, but the tree was recently destroyed. There's a rumor that, when flying over Kansas several years ago, the Pope refused to fly over Stull. It's a very popular spot for drunk high school kids to go visit on a dare in the middle of the night. Sadly, the walls of the church were knocked down a few years ago as well, but you can still tell where it was and the staircase remains. It's supposed to be difficult to find, and I've never bothered to look very hard for it, but a lot of people insist that there really is a set of stairs descending into the ground. I'm not much for creepy stories usually, but the few times I've visited Stull, I wasn't sorry to leave. It's just a creepy place. Not a creepy one, but a local legend / myth / what have you in Gainesville, Florida, is that Tom Petty, who grew up there, wrote the song American Girl about a University of Florida student who committed suicide by jumping off Beatty Towers. Beatty Towers are a pair of apartment-style dorm towers on the edge of UF's campus. SW 13th Street, one of the busiest streets in the city, runs right next to the towers. The general name for 13th is US Route 441, she can hear the cars roll by out of 441, like waves crashing on the beach. And obviously the lyrics are about a girl freaking out about whatever. Those lyrics plus local landmark equals urban legend. Petty categorically denies that's what the song is about. Beatty Towers dorms don't have balconies like it's said in the song, and it's not even clear if a student living there committed suicide at that time, but Gainesville residents and UF students love to play it up. I live in Louisiana, so we have quite a few yarns to spin. My personal favorite is of the Chautauqua Monster in my hometown. The story goes that a circus train was coming along and derailed out in Chautauqua. Now aboard this train was a variety of critters, but the most notorious of them was a freak. It was a cross between a man and beast, yet not quite either, and was terribly ferocious, so naturally it was kept in heavy cage in its own rail car. When the train derailed, all the cars went into the woods and killed most of the animals save for a few monkeys that fled to the woods and this creature. Well, the story goes that should you take you a little ride out to the Chautauqua Bridge in the dead of the night, you then kill your truck, wait till the strike of 12. At first it get eerily quiet, then you'll start to hear a chittering and howling of monkeys, the branches of the trees start to sway and shake, and by the time you cut your truck back on there, he'll stand the Chautauqua Monster waiting for his next victim. Where I'm from, there is a hotel that burned down some years ago. A rumor was a little girl was trapped inside and now haunts the 4th floor or some shit. People would say they saw a girl standing on the balcony in the middle of the night while driving by. As a kid, while attending a wedding, all of us youngsters went up there and the whole floor was doing reconstruction. We thought this is it, we will finally see her. Wasted a good hour doing nothing but spooking ourselves lying about seeing ghosts. Also, I lived in England for a small amount of time, and rumor there was a girl was babysitting and every time she put the baby to sleep, it would cry and point at the scary stuffed clown in the corner. After this happened about 2 to 3 times, the babysitter called the parents to see if she had their permission to move the clown out of the room. However, once getting a hold of the parents, they stated they didn't own any clown toys since the wife was afraid of them. When going back into the room, the window was broken open and a ladder at the bottom. Apparently, some people were stealing babies and killing them or just keeping them, and this was the rumor on how it was done. Someone would dress up like a clown and hide in the toys in the room. I grew up in Oklahoma City. For decades, parents would scare their kids into behaving by telling them about the Chinamen who lived underground and who would come after them if they were bad. My dad told me about it in the mid-1960s, explaining it was one of those weird urban myths that come along occasionally. Then in 1969, abandoned city found. In April 1969, wrecking crews demolishing unused buildings in the downtown area discovered a set of expertly handcrafted stone stairs in an alley behind the Commerce Exchange building at Robinson and Sheridan Avenues, Lee said. The steep steps ended at a scarred, wooden door sealed with an intricate Chinese padlock and leather straps. Underground Chinatown, it seemed, had just been found again. As the city council debated whether to declare the discovery a historic site, former Mayor George Shirk, the director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, led an expedition into the long-abandoned ruins. Among those with him was Jim Argo, then a photographer for the Oklahoman. Shirk took us down there to see this place, Argo said recently. He told us it was a Chinese laundry and opium place. We went down that narrow flight of stairs until we were down in the basement. They had little individual rooms where people lived, about the size of a prison cell. I don't think there was any outside light coming in. Flashlight beams zigzagged around the low-ceilinged structure, picking out an old stove and tattered papers bearing Chinese symbols, apparently some sort of accounting system. Yellowed editorial cartoons about China and a faded American map clung to a wall in a large living area, and a dozen coat hooks hung in a neighboring room. Some of the walls were brick and cool to the touch. Others, used to break large spaces into smaller rooms, were made of wood or wallboard, while the floors were composed of damp cement. A sign attached to a small cubicle bore 2 words, "Come gamble." In all, the chambers occupied a space about 50 feet wide by 140 feet long. Shirk's explorers found a second Robinson Avenue entrance. Shirk guessed that similar rooms exist under the remainder of the block, the Oklahoman reported, but no access to them were found. City council members elected not to save the site. It was destroyed in the name of urban renewal, and what once was underground is now buried. The Cox Convention Center marks its grave. Hundreds of roads in America with cannibal albinos. Not an urban legend, but my friend once wandered away from an away soccer game his sister was playing, no idea why, and he was in a weird clearing in the middle of the woods. He stumbled across a rotting old house. It looked like it hadn't been painted in a long time, the white paint was peeling off very visibly. Anyways, he took several pictures of the house. In one, a young kid wearing a red shirt, about half his size, was very clearly running across the screen, but my friend claimed he hadn't seen anything like it there. Around the same time, the lights in this abandoned-looking house in the middle of the woods turned on and 2 silhouettes were very clearly talking inside. My friend said they turned towards him and then he GTFO. He spent the next 15 lost in the woods and then finally found the game. I spent the next afternoon Sherlocking and found the same red-shirted kid in nearly every photo he had posted, as well as some weird bluish-purple orbs. I used a GPS photo he posted that night and Google Maps to find the exact clearing he was in. But the house? There was no house there. Grew up in small town Oklahoma. The nearby town you might have heard of is Ikmulgee. South of Ikmulgee, a ways on HW 75 in the town of Henrietta. Supposedly a few miles out is a small community on a dead-end road that makes a single loop around the small community. There's less than a dozen houses, a church, and that's it. The church is painted completely black, even the bell. It's said that if you end up there at night you won't make it back out, because the residents will come out of their homes and murder you. The first one to see you will run to the church and ring the bell, which alters the rest. I always thought this story was bullshit, but one day a few years ago we were ducking around on Google Maps and the friend who told me the story found the place. From the aerial view, it was actually a dead-end road that made a little loop with a few houses and a church, which did actually look black. We've never had the balls to actually go out there and check. Bend, Oregon. High Desert Middle School. In the 80s or something, a kid hung himself out back. Not 100% sure, but I think that part's true. Anyway, he supposedly hangs around the school. Now I don't believe in ghosts, but I went there with a friend when I was 14. He lived just down the road, so we snuck out on our longboards at 1 a.m. to go do some ghost hunting. 15 minutes pass, nothing happens. Finally, when my friend wants to leave, we start getting what my friends call the grandfather clock disorder, where you hear a grandfather clock ticking in the back of your head. Everyone there gets it at the exact same time. 15 minutes after getting there. You don't know where it's coming from, but you definitely know it's there. Anyways, I talk him into staying because now I'm interested. So we walk over to the tree that the kid hung himself at, and my vision gets really blurry. Have you ever had your music so loud that your eyes shake? Like that, but besides the GFCD, it's dead silent. The street lights slowly fade out and a branch nearby breaks. I shit myself, and we book it out of there. Probably the sketchiest thing that ever happened to me. I'm 16 now, and I go nowhere by that school anymore. Well, after we get back to his house, we can't sleep, so we stay up talking. Apparently, his vision got all blurry when mine did. So to conclude this wall of text, I believe in ghosts now. Okay, so some particularly unsettling stories circulate around the small, rural towns in the southern Delta region of my home state of Mississippi. They all involve an entity commonly referred to as Jelly Man. The stories kind of started spreading after members of a deer camp near the town of Yazoo City kept disappearing back in the late 80s. Supposedly, Jelly Man lives in the marshy, thickly wooded areas around there and will stalk hunters, fishermen, members of Fish and Wildlife, etc. From what I've heard of Jelly Man, it does not make sound at all, giving it the upper hand for ambush. It has no distinguishable features, other than walking on two legs, and is covered in mud and a thick coat of mucus at all times, and it also seems to be attracted to light. Multiple people have come forward claiming to have found large globs of mucus around their property, on trail cameras, ruining them, and sometimes on livestock, but as far as I know, no samples have been taken. I'm sure it's all a ton of bullshit, but interesting nonetheless. Either way, I'm likely not going to go strolling through any swampy areas of the state at night alone. I can just hear the dripping now. Shudders. There's a hill in the forest nearby northeast London called Hangmans Hill. The legend is that you can drive up to it, turn your engine off and your car will rise up the hill. If I recall correctly, there are a couple of stories behind it, one being that people to be executed were dragged up the hill on a cart and it's meant to be the spirit of the executioner dragging you up. In reality it's probably an illusion, it's not really a hill as such but there is a small incline, it can seem that way because of the other roads and scenery nearby. My grandma's second husband used to work directly with for Jimmy Hoffa. Total mobster, but a nice guy to us kids. He knew what happened to Hoffa but would never talk about it. He had a stroke and, while in the hospital, he started talking about stuff he was supposed to stay silent about. One night, the nurses said some men in suits came to visit him, clearing the room of medical workers and slamming the door shut. They were in there for a while, eventually leaving, saying nothing on their way out. According to the nurses, my step-grandpa was visibly scared and wouldn't speak to anyone. When my grandma eventually brought him home, he still wouldn't speak. This wasn't due to the stroke, he was able to speak but it was like he was too scared too. A couple days later, Grandma went to look for him, and found him hanged from the rafters in the garage. It was ruled a homicide, as there was no way an old man in his medical condition could have gotten easy up there. There was no ladder anywhere, he was found with his fingers inside the noose, as if he were struggling to get free. Grandma told me what happened to Hoffa but that's info I'll take to the grave, one way or the other. Now the reason I say this is because I live in a medium-sized town in a small county, I have friends and family all over the county and I only make friendships that last. Now where the legend comes in is that I've been working full-time since I'm 14. I've never been around on weekends, or between 4 to 10 p.m., but I'm always around when shit's going down. 30-man brawls, epic runs from the cops, near-death experiences, hilarious times, for some reason I'm always in the thick of them. Additionally, my crew of goons was one of the most well-known for partying, drug sales and general fuckery all around the county. Now that I'm an adult and don't have the work-school combo, I'm meeting a lot of people and the common response is on your Converge cult? I've heard so many stories about you from X I didn't realize you were real. It's pretty novel, a little off-putting and its roots come from rumors from high school, A bunch of people think I died in '08, a bunch of people think I was in jail, and a bunch of people just know me through lore. One night I went to a party in the Bronx at Manhattan College. I showed up with these girls who invited us to the Lax Bro house. The Lax brothers did not like this. I do not like being stared at like I just slapped someone's mom. I'm a small guy, but I'll fight the whole lacrosse team before I get pushed around. So Captain Lax Bro, who was hooking up with one of the chicks who brought us, comes up dressed as a lamb Halloween party. The good captain aggressively asks who I am and what I'm dressed as. I replied, I'm Converge Cult, dressed as Converge Cult. What are you, a tampon? Cap turns bright red with flames behind his eyes, but before he can open his mouth, a passing Lax Bro jumps between us, jaw on the floor, and says, you're Converge Cult? Your cousin Matt is one of my best friends. I've heard so much about you. He also asked if one of the many stories about me was true. I give him a quick dap and turned back to the stunned Lax captain and his brontourage, all agape and confused, chucked the deuce and went to refill my beer. They avoided me the rest of the night until I left, when the human tampon ran out and started screaming at me from the balcony, flipped him off without turning around, and brought the ladies to the bar. There's an old cemetery nicknamed the Rev in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. It's a burial ground for local soldiers killed during the American Revolution. There's a legend that's been going around for a while that a couple of kids tried to open the gates of hell in the surrounding woods, as well as did a lot of satanic rituals and sacrifices. There's a few stories actually now that I'm thinking about it. Everyone that visits after dark says they get an overwhelming eerie feeling, chills, hair stands up, etc. There's one tombstone everyone considers to be cursed. It has been stolen at least 8 or 9 times, and every time it ends up being brought back because bad luck would follow the thief/thieves. Some say a man was killed and burned on the dirt road in close proximity to the entrance, possibly associated with the satanic practices. A teenage girl crashed her car into a tree and died within a quarter mile. The last tale I remember being circulated was about a group of teenagers who went there around 3 a.m., got really startled, took off, and one got left behind who was never seen again. I personally know a few people who have been here around 3 a.m. And the story they told me was unsettling as well as interesting, to say the least. I guess they arrived, parked the car at the entrance, rolled the windows down, and heard drums, trumpets, a few faint bangs, and what they described I interpreted as people marching along, boots on grass, leaves, stepping on branches. And if that didn't freak them out enough, they heard the howling of wolves or coyotes. This place is in the woods, but Fitchburg is still a pretty populated city with plenty of houses and buildings. So wolves aren't really native to the area. Coyotes are, but never in large numbers. I've lived here my entire life and have only seen 1 or 2 coyotes. They described it as being very loud, like there were a lot of them. And they couldn't pinpoint what direction the sound was coming from, because it was surrounding them. So they left. I've always wanted to go and test my luck, as I find this somewhat interesting. In Jamestown, NC, we have the story of Lydias Bridge. The legend goes that one night some time ago a young girl was walking home from prom after her date stood her up and was the victim of a hit and run incident near the bridge and was killed. Now, supposedly, if you drive past late at night, sometimes you will see her hitchhiking, and should you pick her up, she will give you directions to her home only to vanish before you ever arrive. There is also a slight variation in which she has stood up and hangs herself from said bridge. Been to the bridge many a times, and it's a fun place to go and spook each other or spray paint. The entire bridge, including the road under it, is covered in graffiti by local teens/high schoolers. It's almost like a rite of passage around here, and the police are cool about it as they never stop kids from doing it. There's one that's actually right near my childhood home. We live on a mountain with about 5 homes all spaced apart. The actual owner of the mountain has a ranch that's at the base, and he uses a lot of the land on the mountain as pasture to put the horses and cattle. We are free to roam the land because there's also trails for hiking and such. Anyways, in a few fields over there's 2 old tiny stone houses with a well between them that are probably over 100 years old. The story goes that a man, his wife, and their baby lived there. The man was very drunk one night. The baby would not stop crying no matter what the wife did, and the man was becoming angrier and more agitated until he couldn't take it any longer, and in a drunken rage took the baby out of the wife's arms and took it outside and threw it down the well. The wife became hysterical and was pleading with the husband to go and save the baby, but this just made him angry and also threw her down the well. So the urban legend goes that on a full moon night, if you're around the well, you'll be able to hear the cries of the woman and child. We never actually went out to test it though. The land has coyotes and a bear that has been seen, so going out at night was never something any of us wanted to do because it's pretty far from the houses. May have to go back sometime and see if it's true. There's an old abandoned church nearby, with the windows all boarded up and the doors are locked. It closed down some 30 years ago, and it's pretty small and near the edge of town. A rumor has gone around the middle and high schools for years that someone still inhabits it, despite it clearly being decrepit and empty. Well, the legend goes that you knock on the front doors 3 times, and then run or walk around the church 3 times. Then, you put your ear up to the door, and you'll hear something being whispered and then 3 loud knocks. Apparently a bunch of kids have tried it and confirmed, and even a few trusted adults in the community. Rumor has it that it could be the spirit of the dead owner of the church, except no one knows if the owner is dead. Or it could be homeless people living in there who started the rumor and provided for it to scare some children. In Chicago, when it snows over a few inches, enough to shovel out a parking spot, people will shovel a spot and then put something in that spot to call dibs, like an old lawn chair or a broken vacuum or something. Dibs is a hotly contested thing. Some people swear that you must respect the dibs, others think shoveling is a community effort, and just because you shoveled one spot doesn't mean you get to claim it indefinitely. Well, one of the things I've heard about the dibs controversy is that if you disrespect the dibs, i.e. move someone's dibs chair and park your car in their spot, your car will get messed with, one of the more sinister methods being someone pouring water all over your car until it freezes over, or someone reburying your entire car with snow. I'm sure it happens, but I've never seen it. Is it something that people have actually seen happen, or is it sort of a boogeyman thing? Waco, Texas. Outside Cameron Park, off in the woods, there lie the ruins of a castle. The Witch's Castle. The story goes that back in the 1800s she used to sacrifice children, black servants, people's pets, all sorts of things. She performed black magic and any number of things you can think of associated with witchcraft. Finally, the townspeople had enough of the old witch and revolted. They marched into the woods to her castle, locked her inside, and burned and tore down the castle while she was still inside. She died cursing the people and their families and all of Waco. It used to be open to the public when my grandparents were young, but now it's been closed off and speared from Cameron Park. However, there are ways to still get to it. Now when you go, the gate has a graffiti clown on it and most people stop there because it's pitch black and creepy. If you keep going down the wooded trail you'll make it to the ruins. I've been and I've pissed all over it. Nothing bad has happened to me because of it, I think. As a side note, one time me and some buddies went and there's an old dead and decaying tree by the clown gate entrance. Well, someone thought it would be a good idea to literally hang with fishing line apples upon apples on each of the dead trees. Now that was creepy. The town I grew up in contains the building that served as the county jail and courthouse from the mid-1700s until the town's incorporation in the 1850s. When the town was incorporated, the building was converted into the town hall with the courtroom serving as the council chamber and the cells converted into offices. The legend says that the inmates suffered greatly, with many of them dying of disease, malnourishment and hypothermia, usual for jails at the time. There was also one official hanging at the jail, and the legend says that there were 2 unofficial ones. The building is unsettling, made of old, gray limestone coated with vines, the narrow windows still containing bars and the front complete with a creepy entrance gate. It is said that the building is riddled with hauntings, with people reporting self-typing typewriters, doors opening and closing, lights turning on and off, and inexplicable cold spots. At night, it is said you can hear screams and cries. When renovations were done in the 1980s, the plaster on the walls was lifted to reveal the bare limestone, some of it containing eerie messages etched in. A couple years ago the town hall was moved to another building because the building became too small, so they claimed. It now contains some community rooms and some offices. So I live near Chandler, Arizona. Apparently there's this teacher at a middle school, Ed Hermanski, who, for whatever reason, told his students this really disturbing horror story that actually happened to him. He called it the Kimberly story. I don't really know the whole story and have been promising myself I'd find a recording of it somewhere, but I never get around to it. But, it had something to do with one of his students when he was teaching in Texas. I guess her parents were murdered and she showed up to school with blood on her or something. And Kimberly became a suspect in the case. I believe the detective working on the case was a friend of Hermanski's. Well, apparently, this story got incredibly famous among the students/people of Chandler and it became an annual thing. They started moving the story time to the gym where it would fill up with people waiting to hear the story. I guess it freaked a lot of people out and some even swear they see Kimberly walking around the streets of Chandler at night. My mom used to tell me of this story from the village where my grandmother was raised. This is around the time when people were migrating from India to Pakistan and vice versa. Backstory. The village my grandmother was from was established after the Muslims migrated over from India. They settled it near a few lakes in the area. The land where the village was settled was used as a Hindu cremation site. This also included young brides who were burned alive alongside their husband if he had died. So, the story goes like this: apparently there was a young girl from that area, who was killed a day after her wedding because her husband died. People in the village say they can hear crying in the streets at night, and a lot of newly married women in the area also claim having nightmares/sleep paralysis that involve this girl. My grandma also had an experience with this, but it was a bit more realistic. A few days after she had gotten married, she was sleeping and just woke up in the middle of her sleep. She said she was scared for some reason, as electricity was not common in villages at those times, so candles and shit was used. She turns to her side, facing the door, and bam, she sees a girl dressed in colorful Indian wedding clothes with jewelry and everything. My grandma says she couldn't do anything, she was so scared. The girl then said to my grandma that I was like you, and by then she woke up my granddad and started fucking screaming apparently. The girl wasn't there anymore, nor did she have any further encounters as they moved to a city. But, this story really fascinated me. When I went to Pakistan, I asked a lot of people, relatives, about this, especially the females, and they all backed it up. There is also one lake that was the exact site where the cremations took place. No one took me to it as everyone was scared, and then once I got told the stories of that place, I pussied out. That village has a lot of stories and incidents like this. In New Smyrna Beach, Florida, now a tourist beach type city with condos along the Atlantic Ocean, there was a house built on the beach front when there was no development, 60s or early 70s. It was built and owned by, supposedly, an ex-mafia member. There was a metal drawbridge going to the front door, a garage where cars stack on top of one another, and a moat built around the front of the property. The glass was bulletproof and hurricane-proof. Well, one day, the guy wound up dead, mangled underneath his own tractor. Rumor has it that the guy knew too much and the mafia wanted him dead. The death was chalked up to an accident. Well, after he died, my grandfather bought the house and is our family's vacation house. There have been a couple instances of things appearing out of nowhere, like we lost a dice playing Monopoly and couldn't find it for the life of us, and on our last day the dice was in plain sight beside the stove. Another time my friends were sleeping upstairs, and I passed out on the couch downstairs. They heard a coffee mug break at around 5 a.m. and said they heard me walking to bed. However, in my admittedly sleepy state, I remember walking by the already broken mug on my way to bed thinking which one of these idiots broke the mug and didn't clean it up. Well, they swear it was me, and from what I remember, it was already broken. These events have only happened recently in the last 3 years, no weird stuff beforehand. The college I went to had several stories about certain buildings being haunted. Winnie Davis Hall of History. Back in the day when my college used to be an all-girls school, one student committed suicide by jumping from the open area from the top floor to the bottom floor. Rumor has it that at night you can hear her scream as she falls to her death. Granbury Hall. This building used to the gym and swimming pool, which has been converted to classrooms and offices. The basement in Granbury still has the markers for the depth of the pool. Supposedly a young boy drowned to death. Also, there's a rumor a student had a heart attack at the entrance and died. He made a chair out of a tree trunk that's still there to this day. Students and professors have reported seeing ghosts or some sort of paranormal activity in the building. The church behind the college. There's a small church behind the school. The church and college are separated from a quarry that's filled up with water. I can't remember if 1 or 2 children died at the church, but supposedly you can see children playing, laughing, and singing at the church. I don't know if this really counts, but it's something I recently found out. I believe it started in Texas. Or something. But anyway. Here's the story. So I live near Chandler, Arizona. Apparently there's this teacher at a middle school, Ed Hermanski, who, for whatever reason, told his students this really disturbing horror story that actually happened to him. He called it the Kimberly story. I don't really know the whole story and have been promising myself I'd find a recording of it somewhere, but I never get around to it. But, it had something to do with one of his students when he was teaching in Texas. I guess her parents were murdered and she showed up to school with blood on her or something. And Kimberly became a suspect in the case. I believe the detective working on the case was a friend of Hermanski's. Well, apparently, this story got incredibly famous among the students/people of Chandler, and it became an annual thing. They started moving the story time to the gym where it would fill up with people waiting to hear the story. I guess it freaked a lot of people out, and some even swear they see Kimberly walking around the streets of Chandler at night. I don't know. It intrigued me, that's for sure. In my old college down there is an abandoned house south of town we call the Willwood House. It's your typical go there with friends and try to scare them kind of place. We dare each other to stay the night there on Halloween nights, you know? That kind of stuff. To my knowledge, no one really knows who the people that lived in that house were and what happened to them. They just completely abandoned their house. There is an old and rundown car in the front yard and stacks of bills on the tables. The floor caved in and flooded the basement as some spots. Because of this, the cops patrol this area frequently due to the potential danger of falling in. One time, a friend of mine went to the Willwood house and took a framed picture back to their dorm. Overnight, all of their sinks and water sources turned on and their room was soaked the next morning. Needless to say, they took the picture back.